What is up, Dynasty Leaguers? Welcome back into another DLF YouTube channel video. Today, we are going to be going through, just like I did with my wide receiver position, and continuing on with this kind of little mini series that I've been doing, is I want to talk about 3 running backs that I'm looking to fade in Dynasty startup drafts right now. You could also kind of look at this from a trading perspective as well, although it kind of depends more so on your situation and how your team is actually progressing and what direction you're going in for trades. But more or less, this is going to be in a startup mindset with these running backs. So without further ado, I'd say let's just get right into the video. So like I said in the introduction, we're talking about 3 running backs that I am really looking to fade in Dynasty startup drafts. And just like the other videos and such, I have ordered these from the most valuable running back all the way down to the least valuable running back, just in terms of June DLF ADP. So we can start at the very top. We can start with the very first one, and that is Saints running back Alvin Kamara, the current RB5, going 5th overall in 1 quarterback leagues or 14th overall in Superflex leagues. And I don't know, honestly, if this is or is not a hot take. I've kind of seen different approaches on how we are treating Alvin Kamara now in this post-Drew Brees era. But it is really weird, in my opinion, to be fading a running back who has honestly never finished below RB9 in his entire career. In the 4 seasons he's played since joining the NFL in 2017, he's never finished below RB9 in a single season, which is absolutely fantastic. He's been fantastic for fantasy and has been absolutely amazing every single year since 2017. But there's actually a few reasons why I think we should fade Alvin Kamara in startups. And we can start with the first one, the biggest heavy hitter reason onto why to fade Alvin Kamara, and that is his splits with and without Drew Brees. And I'm not talking just even the 4 games that we saw with Alvin Kamara without Drew Brees last year with Taysom Hill, but even the 4 games in 2019 that we also saw with Alvin Kamara without Drew Brees. So we can look at this table here, and we can see that over the last 2 years, over 2019 and 2020, he's played 21 games with Drew Brees, averaging 23.4 fantasy points per game. The rushing output is pretty similar, 11.8 rush attempts, 60 yards, 0.8 rushing touchdowns. The targets are at 7.6 targets per game, 6 receptions, 50 yards, and 0.2 receiving touchdowns. And then you can contrast that with the 8 games that he has played without Drew Brees, and that PPR average dips 7 points per game all the way down to 17. The rushing stays pretty similar, 13.8 and 58.5 and 0.5 rushing touchdowns. The rushing's all basically there, but the targets and his receiving workload drops basically down about 2 targets per game, 2 receptions per game, 20 receiving yards per game, and down to 0.1 receiving touchdowns per game without Drew Brees. And don't get me wrong, 17 points per game is still very good for fantasy football, but it's not elite. It's not what we're used to from Alvin Kamara. In fact, that would be good for the RB10 in points per game in 2020, basically tied with Jonathan Taylor last year in his rookie year, and within half a point per game more than Joe Mixon, Austin Eckler, and Myles Gaskin last year in 2020. So that's not Alvin Kamara production, at least not what we're used to, but it could be kind of a reflection of what we're expecting to see moving forward with either Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill, whoever the Saints actually go with as their starter in 2021. And then you can also look in those 8 games without Drew Brees over the past 2 years. His PPR totals in those 8 games, I'll read them off for you, sorted from fewest all the way to the most. 6.2, 10.5, 11.9, 13.6, 16.9, 17.7, and then 22.4 and 37.1. So the ceiling is definitely still there, although he's not hitting that as much as what he was with Drew Brees. And I think that floor drops off a little bit more because we're not getting the same receiving workload and volume that he was getting with Drew Brees. And you can see that as well, those target totals in those same 8 games, again, from fewest to most, 1, 2, 3, 3, 7, 8, 10, 10 are his target totals in those 8 games. And in those 8 games, he has 4 games with 3 or fewer targets. Contrast that to with Drew Brees, he had 4 games over the last 2 years below 6 targets entirely with Drew Brees. So that receiving volume definitely is hurt by not having Drew Brees at the quarterback position. So I think that is honestly one of the biggest reasons and biggest concerns that I have with Alvin Kamara heading into 2021 in his future dynasty outlook. not to mention the fact that he also turns 26 at the end of July, which would tie him for the second oldest RB1 in ADP with Austin Eckler and Derrick Henry. And so there's just all that situation and all that factor coming into why I think we should be fading Alvin Kamara at his current RB5 price tag. And he is being drafted 5th overall in one quarterback leagues. That RB5, it's basically Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Dalvin Cook, and then Alvin Kamara. That's your top 5 overall and your top 5 running backs. And the way that the rest of that works is 6 through 9 is a string of 4 wide receivers between Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, DK Metcalf, and AJ Brown. And that's not the order, but those are the 4. And then it hits another kind of mix up of running backs and wide receivers, as you can see, kind of the second tier of both positions. So basically, whenever I'm looking at all that, and one of the things that I also have been kind of, teaching and learning from Ryan McDowell, who says this a lot, is that you can actually, really buy years by fading Alvin Kamara or trading him away for other running backs who are 3 or 4 years younger than him, like Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift, Antonio Gibson. Or if you still want that same age range, you could take somewhat of a discount and get, in my opinion, the same running back, but in a better situation over a round later after Alvin Kamara and take Austin Eckler. Or you can take that same age discount that's being applied for Ezekiel Elliott that's not necessarily being applied for Alvin Kamara. And I think all of these running backs, the 5 other running backs that I just named that you could fade Kamara for, are all going to be pretty similar, I think, at the end of the year when we're talking about total fantasy production in terms of maybe being somewhere from RB5 all the way down to RB13 or 14, I think, ultimately. And so there's really not going to be a major difference because I don't think any of these guys are really going to explode. And so they're not going to be like league-winning type running backs. And that's why I think a lot of these guys are very similar. And so give me the guys that are either the same age but cheaper or the same price but younger. That's basically the situation that I'm looking at with fading off of Alvin Kamara. The second running back that I'm looking to fade is a guy I actually already mentioned before, and this is going to be somewhat of a similar argument for a wide receiver that I talked about in Julio Jones, but Derrick Henry, the current RB9, 15th overall in one quarterback leagues, 19th overall in Superflex. If you, like I said, if you watch the video on wide receiver fades, it's a pretty similar argument to what I made for Julio Jones, with basically that Henry is the oldest running back drafted in practically the top 100 in one quarterback leagues. Mike Davis is 28 years old, going 98th overall. So from 1 to 97, Derrick Henry is the oldest running back being taken in those first 8 or 9 rounds, basically at 27 years old. And what you're doing if you take Derrick Henry at that 1-2 turn in your startup drafts in one quarterback leagues is then you are now saying you are 100% a competing team, which I mean, we all want to do and we all want to be, but that doesn't give you any leeway, with the rest of your picks in your startup drafts. It doesn't give you much leeway when you're actually in season. In case your team actually does end up not producing like you would think, or maybe you have some injuries, some other bad luck, it really, backs you into a corner of what your team's direction actually is by taking Derrick Henry that early at his age. And like I said, basically just influences every decision after that pick. And I mean, let's be honest, like I'm not here to say that Derrick Henry sucks or isn't going to be good. Derrick Henry is going to be a top 5 running back again in 2021. He's going to have 350 carries again, probably rush for 1,700 or more rushing yards, maybe hit 2,000 again like he did this year. Like he's going to do all that again in 2021. But then we're talking about, if we project ourselves into this time next year, we're talking about a 28-year-old running back off of 3 consecutive 300-plus carry seasons, and we haven't seen that in a while, and basically over a decade where a running back has been that old, getting that much workload and volume on a year-to-year basis. There are plenty of examples of running backs over the age of 28 receiving 300 carries in a season since 2000. There's a handful of guys like LaDainian Tomlinson, Curtis Martin, Sean Alexander, even as recently as Adrian Peterson. There's a handful of others that I didn't even mention. So it's not out of the ordinary for a running back to get that type of volume. And Derrick Henry is definitely every bit of a freak athlete like those other running backs are, and is definitely built for that volume. It's just we haven't seen it in a long time, and this isn't really the age that the NFL is looking to do that, even if the Tennessee Titans might still be living, a decade ago with giving Derrick Henry all this workload. But, it's just kind of projecting onto what the fantasy community is going to be thinking a year from now, looking at a 28-year-old Derrick Henry. Like he's not going to gain any value over, the next year. Maybe he will in season just in terms of trade value, because that's when we're actually getting production and his actual value out of him. But next offseason, it's going to be really, really rough. He's not going to be an RB1 in ADP probably. And, I could see a lot of these other guys from this 2020 RB class, like if Antonio Gibson shows out, maybe DeAndre Swift just looks okay, and then his situation kind of, gets better in 2022 with the Detroit Lions. Najee Harris is a couple years younger than him as well. If he really looks good with the Pittsburgh Steelers, maybe puts up a top 10 fantasy season in his rookie year. These are all guys that are going within half a round behind Derrick Henry right now, who all could potentially jump him next year. So while they may not have the same production, that longevity is still there from an age standpoint in those other three players. And it doesn't necessarily force you into competing automatically. Like it gives your team some flex because of their age, with them being only 22, 23 years old, that you can still not compete immediately and still be, building for 2022 or 2023. It doesn't back you into that corner of having to compete immediately like drafting Derrick Henry does in the first round or the second round of your startup draft. So that's why, in my opinion, Derrick Henry is a fade for me, and why I'm not really looking to draft him in my startups. He's totally fine to have if he's on your dynasty team already and you're already competing. He's on my competing dynasty roster as well. I'm super excited to have him because I think that I could be, a really, really strong team in this dynasty league that I own him in. But drafting him now in your startups is scary to me at his current RB9 price, and that's why he's a fade for me on this list. The third guy I want to mention is we're going to drop a little bit, definitely outside of the top 10, basically down to almost the bottom of the RB2s overall, and we're talking about Josh Jacobs, the RB21, going 37th overall in one quarterbacks, 61st overall in Superflex. Like, Josh Jacobs is the literal definition of a compiler. Like, it does not feel good to have Josh Jacobs on your roster. The trade market for him right now sucks. He's just a guy who's just going to go out there and get 18 carries for 70 yards and maybe score you a touchdown, maybe catch you a couple of receptions. And that's about it for Josh Jacobs, which is why I think he's down there at RB21. Now, with all that being said, though, he has been sneaky good for fantasy. He finishes the RB21 in 2019 in his rookie year, and actually RB8 last year. If you didn't know, he was a top 10 running back in fantasy last year. The difference between those 2 years was basically 5 more rushing touchdowns in 2020, as well as about 20 more receiving fantasy points, just by practically doubling his targets, even though the receptions didn't double, and then about 60 or 70 more receiving yards from 2019 to 2020. But when you look at what the Vegas Raiders want to do and what John Gruden wants to do, you can see that Josh Jacobs' role in this offense is there, and that's not going to change. The Raiders added Kenyon Drake in free agency for a pretty nice, contract, a pretty penny there that they paid Kenyon Drake. And Drake is definitely going to provide some more upside in the receiving game. He's a very good receiver, even if we didn't see that and that usage with him with the Arizona Cardinals last year, but he was a very good receiver in Miami, and we also saw flashes of it at the tail end of 2019 with the Arizona Cardinals. So I think that's really what they wanted to sign Kenyon Drake for, is to add that versatility out of the backfield with potential wheel routes and stuff like that, and all that other stuff that they, for some reason, aren't going to give Josh Jacobs. So they have Kenyon Drake there, who I think also could be more than what Devontae Booker was last year. Booker had 93 carries last year, taken away just a little bit from Josh Jacobs' total workload volume. But I think Drake could, get a little bit more than 93 carries and is definitely going to see more targets and receiving volume than what Booker got last year as well. So that's all stuff that's going away from Josh Jacobs. The Raiders still also have Jalen Richard, and they re-signed Theo Riddick back in March. That may not sound like much. Why am I making an argument around Jalen Richard and Theo Riddick? But if you look at those two and Kenyon Drake, all three of those guys are very, very good receiving backs. So I think that tells us about how the Raiders view Josh Jacobs and that they don't want to use him in that way. And so because of the low receiving volume, Jacobs has also a very low fantasy floor. Last year, he had 3 games under 8 PPR fantasy points and 7 games between 10 and 14 fantasy points, with only 3 of those 10 games that I just mentioned under 8 and between 10 and 14. Only 3 of those games he finished inside the top 20. at the running back position on those weeks. And that production is largely replaceable at the running back position, especially as you get going into the season. Other running backs get hurt. Some running backs step up and do more. You have, teams that are producing potentially 2 running backs at the same time, given if one of them is, more of the 1-2 grinder, the other one's a PPR kind of back. A lot of that production on a weekly basis in season is largely replaceable. And so those 10 games that Josh Jacobs is giving you is very replaceable. And then the other 5 or 6, depending on injury, could just be, really, really good. And it's definitely going to help you. But are those games worth it at his current RB21 price? And so with that price on the board, and I was looking at other running backs that were going around Josh Jacobs, and these other running backs are going within a half a round of him that I like way, way more. Travis Etienne and Javonte Williams are both a couple picks ahead of Josh Jacobs in ADP. I think they should absolutely be ahead of Josh Jacobs, and I would be prioritizing them way more than I would be Josh Jacobs in a startup. David Montgomery is actually going after Josh Jacobs. I like Montgomery a lot. I actually highlighted him in my running backs to target video last week. So I like David Montgomery. Or you could even just wait 2 rounds and grab Chris Carson and Kareem Hunt on a 2-round discount from Josh Jacobs, or get a 3-round discount and go and get Myles Gaskin for the 2021 season, who I think is going to be very good. And like I said, that production that Josh Jacobs gives you for over half of the year is largely replaceable. And I think Myles Gaskin can, replace a lot of that production at a 3-round discount. Not to mention, even the fact if you're not looking at the running back position there, the other wide receivers on the board that you are passing on to draft Josh Jacobs, guys like Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, Chris Godwin, or even if you want to lock down the tight end position, Josh Jacobs' teammate Darren Waller. Like, all these guys I think are just way too much of an opportunity cost to pass up while you're drafting Josh Jacobs, and that's why he is a major fade for me in Dynasty startups. Not to mention, like I said at the beginning, when it just doesn't feel good to have Josh Jacobs on your team, the trade market's not really there. He's just kind of this like grinder, compiler type of running back who might be fine as your RB2 because he might never really kill you, but more often than not, he's never really going to help you and like really propel your team to the next level on a weekly basis. And so that's why I have Josh Jacobs as a fade as well on this list. Finally, I do want to mention as I was going through ADP looking for players that I like to, target and to fade, one player really stuck out to me as a player that I just want to include on this list as a honorable mention to fade. We're not going into any detail on this one, but please do not draft Melvin Gordon at RB35 overall. Guys after him that I like a lot more: Zach Moss, Tony Pollard, James Conner is even going 2 rounds later than Melvin Gordon, and I think has much more of a handle on his starting job on the Arizona Cardinals than Melvin Gordon does on that Denver Broncos, starting position, especially with Javonte Williams there. So please don't look to draft Melvin Gordon at that RB35 price. I'd rather be taking other, potential 1As in their offenses like Zach Moss or James Conner, or high potential RB2s in their offense like Tony Pollard or other backups and such like that. Like, Melvin Gordon is basically done. I don't know where he's ultimately going to land come next year because he is a free agent after this year. Like, he could be going the way that we've seen Todd Gurley and Le'Veon Bell go, where they can't even get on a team. And so that could be what we're looking at with Melvin Gordon. So don't go anywhere near that in your dynasty startup. So I just wanted to mention that and bring that up in this running back fade video. So that is going to do it for today's video. That was my 4 running backs that I wanted to share with you guys that I am fading in my dynasty startups right now. So if you have any startups going on, or if you're preparing for any as we move through, the final week of June, getting into July, if you guys are joining the DLF Ultraflex leagues over on Facebook, that link is down in the description. If you want to join in any of those, they're super fun. It's an all flex league with 2 super flex, 10 starters. 2 of those guys are super flex. So it is and has been really, really fun to see how those leagues have been working out in those startup drafts and everything, as we've been talking about them into the DLF Slack channel. So if those are any of your startups or any of the other startups and stuff like that, make sure you're checking out not only this video, but I did another one for wide receiver fades and then wide receiver targets and running back targets as well last week. So check all those out. If you're preparing for any dynasty startups, we'll be getting some more dynasty content here throughout the rest of July, doing some Dynasty Startup mock drafts starting this next Tuesday. And of course, all the other awesome content from the DLF team on this YouTube channel. So please make sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below if you have any other fades or if you agree or disagree with any of my players that I already named here. So with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.